Hello there, welcome to another video in the Studying English at Aston University how-to series. In this video I'll be talking to you about how to write a list of references. My name is Dr. Robbie Love and I'm a lecturer in English language here at Aston. And this video really is complements my other video on how to cite references in the actual text of the essay. So if you haven't watched the how to cite video, I would recommend that you watch that first and then come back to this video on the list of references because they kind of come as a pair. And so in this video I'll be talking about what happens when you've been citing material throughout your essay and you come to actually compiling the list of the sources that you've used at the end. As a recap from my previous video on citation, remember it's important to cite any material that you use in your essay, regardless of whether you're actually quoting it directly or not. That's really important. And as I said in the previous video, in English this typically includes books, chapters from books, academic journal articles, and online materials. When it comes to actually producing the references list, there are different formats and conventions for different types of source, and so I'll give you examples of each so that you have a good sense of what's expected of you. As I mentioned, English at Aston uses the Harvard style for citation and referencing. The style guide that we use in English is available in Blackboard in your departmental student information page, and there are two components to citation in English here at Aston. The first that I've talked about in my other video on in-text citation is in-text citation, and the topic for this video is the list of references at the end. Now you'll have probably heard of the term bibliography as well. The reference list and the term bibliography are often used interchangeably. They do actually mean different things, and this can sometimes be confusing for students. A bibliography is typically a list of any sources or readings which may be relevant to the topic of the writing, but they might not have actually been referred to explicitly in the text. They may just be similar pieces which may be of interest to the reader. A list of references, however, is actually an explicit list of just the sources which are cited explicitly in the text by the author, and that is what we want. So it's very important that you understand this distinction, because sometimes you may be asked to produce a bibliography, but actually in English at Aston, even if you're asked for a bibliography, what we actually mean is a list of references. We want a list of specifically the sources that you have mentioned in your text, and nothing more. As I mentioned in my other video, footnotes and endnotes are not to be used for citing sources. You can use footnotes for other things, but not for citation. So you've got the in-text citations in the other video, and now we'll talk about the list of references. So what do we actually need? What is a list of references and what does it contain? So it's a list of all of the sources that you've cited in your essay. Now it's very important that you only include the sources that you have cited. So everything that you cite throughout the essay must have an entry in the references list. That's very important. You can't cite something and then not put it in the list. Likewise, everything that is on the list must have been cited. So you can't have something on the list which is not actually discussed in your essay. So it's very important that you keep checking to make sure that basically your citation has to come in a pair. If you mention something in the essay, then it has to go in the references list and vice versa. But what you'll never find is that a source just has one of those two things. You'll never see a source just cited but not in the list, and you'll never see a source that's in the reference list but that isn't actually cited in the text. So they come in, you have to make sure you have both for everything, not just one or the other. So to be clear, if you have just consulted the source in preparation for your essay or background research, which we all do, we all read things which we don't ultimately end up discussing explicitly in the text, it's of course fine to do that, and that's no problem. But if you don't actually discuss it in your essay or mention it at all, then it doesn't go on the list. So there may well be some sources that you read as background information which don't end up on the list because you don't talk about them. That's absolutely fine, no problem. The list itself should be ordered alphabetically by the surname of the author. If there's more than one author, then obviously you go for the first author, their surname, and it's located, the list itself is located at the end of the essay, just after the conclusion. And then if you do have an appendix, then that would come after the references list. So the appendices would come after the references if you have any. So what about the format? As I said, this varies according to convention and also the actual source, the type of source itself. Books are probably the easiest because they require the least information. And so you can see on the top there, the format for books is surname and then initial, followed by the year of publication, and then the title of the book in italics, and then the place of publication. So that is, it's a bit of an archaic practice, and some citation style guides are starting to remove this, but we still have it in place here for now, at least. The place of publication is the city where the publisher who published the book is based. Where is their office? So this publisher of this book by Coates from 1983 is Croomhelm, and their office is in London. And so you would say after the title of the book, you go London, Croomhelm. And so that's London, the place, and then the publisher is called Croomhelm. Now, if you have several authors, this is the point where you would list all of them individually with their surname and their initial. So in my other video, I talked about how for the in-text citation, if you have more than two authors, then you just say the first author and then et al., as you can see at the bottom there. However, in the references list, this is the part where you actually do tell us who all of the authors were. And so, yes, sometimes that does involve a fairly long list. However, luckily for us in English, most sources only have at most a small handful of authors. In the hard sciences, you're more likely to find papers with, dozens and dozens and dozens, maybe even hundreds of authors. That is essentially non-existent in English. At most, you might have 5 or 6, but most commonly you just have 1, 2, or 3. So it's not so much to worry about. So you've got the list there of the authors, and then the rest of the information is presented in the same way. For edited books, it's almost identical. The only thing that you add in is that you indicate that it's an edited book, that the people you have here are not technically not the authors, but they are the people who edited the book. And before the year, you put in brackets either ed if it's one person, or eds plural if it's more than one person who's edited the book. And so there's a couple of examples there. Everything else otherwise is exactly the same. What about journal articles? This is where things get slightly more complicated. For the journal article, it starts out the same as a book. So you have the surname and the initial and the year of publication. Then things change slightly. You put the title of the paper inside single quotation marks and not italicized. And then in italics, you have the name of the journal. And the journal, typically, academic journals, they're published in volumes. And each volume will have a number of issues. And so you have a volume number, and then immediately after the volume number in brackets, you'd put the issue number. And then you'd have the page range of the entire article. So it tells you from what is the page range of the article within that journal. So here's an example here from one of my papers from a couple of years ago. You've got the names of the authors there: Love, Denbury, Hardy, Bretzina, McHenry. The year 2017. The title of the paper is there in single quoted brackets: Spoken BNC, up to Corpus of Everyday Conversations. The journal is called International Journal of Corpus Linguistics. It's volume 22, issue 3, and the pages in this issue of the journal that you will find this article, the page range of the article, is 319 to 344. There's another example there with Miller, 2009, demonstrating the same thing. So that's slightly more complicated. You'll notice there's some information that's not required for articles. It is required for books. So it does sort of swap in and out a little bit. It's more common when we're talking about going back to edited books. It's actually more common that you would cite that you'd be citing a specific chapter within a book rather than talking about the entire book itself. And so here you're citing a chapter in a book, and if you're going to do that, then you have to mention the authors of the chapter and also the editors of the book. And so in this first example, you have Bybee and Pagliuca and Perkins. They are the authors of the chapter, which is called Back to the Future. And then E.C. Trogo and B. Hine are the editors of the book, which is called Approaches to Grammaticalization. You'll notice here that for the editors, when you're listing them, when you're referencing a chapter of a book, the initials of the editors come before the surname, and you'll notice, of course, that otherwise the initials come after the surname. So one of those idiosyncrasies which people often forget. And then, because it's a book, you have the place of publication. In this case, it's Amsterdam, and the publisher is John Benjamin's, and then the page range. That you'll find the chapter. And there's another example there for you to have a look at yourself. Finally, I'll mention internet sources. Now, there's a lot of contradictory information out there about the use of internet sources. Often people kind of talk about you should just avoid them at all costs, and really nowadays it's slightly naive to kind of have a blanket ban on internet sources, because there are lots and lots of reasons why, perfectly legitimate reasons why you would or should use a source from the internet. There are also sources which are not good, but there are many which are, and there are many good reasons to do so. For example, you may be, if you're doing a language study which is based in a particular context, maybe you're investigating discourse in a certain context, then it may be as part of your contextual discussion to kind of introduce the context and talk about the story of the language context, that you might refer to official government documents or even newspaper articles, not as a source of theoretical linguistic information, but as a contextual source to describe a bit about what was going on. And so, for example, you might refer to government documents. Here's an example of a government document about COVID. And this would be how you'd reference it in the references list. If you don't have the name of the author, often, especially with big organizations like governments and others, you don't know the name of the person or people who wrote the document. Often you just know it's published by the name of an organization. And so in this case, Public Health England would be the name of the author, and then the year. The name of the page or the document would go in italics. Then the URL, so the web address, you put it in full. And then in brackets afterwards, you would put the date that you last accessed it. The reason why you put the date, the specific date, the day that you last accessed the URL, is if, say, I'm marking an essay that you wrote and you've referred to this source, I could then click on that, but obviously internet sources, web pages can change and be continually edited, and so it may be different when I access it compared to when you used it. And so if I know that you accessed it on the 1st of September and then I'm reading it in October or November, I know that perhaps the information you're referring to may not be there anymore. And so it's important information. Okay, that's enough from me for now in this video. There are other sources which there are formats for which you may refer to in the references list. Please do consult the Harvard Style Guide in Blackboard. If you have any questions about this, please do contact me or another member of staff. We'll be happy to advise you on what to do. All right. Thank you very much. See you soon.